I'm a musician, a writer, and an activist in the Houston area. And today I'd like to talk about the instruments and the music of India. Now, as you know, India is a country in South Asia, and it has a very, very long history of music and musical instruments. Now, before one can understand the instruments, it's probably necessary to understand a little bit about the music of India. Indian music is a modal form of music, which means that we're not just limited to a major or minor scale like we are in Western music, but we have many, many different possible modes, in many ways like the ecclesiastic or Greek modes that one oftentimes hears. Now, this is very important because when you have a music which by its very nature is modal, you don't know exactly where the tonic is going to be. It's not implicit in the way the music is put together. Therefore, what's extremely important in music of India is a drone. A drone like one finds in bagpipes or even the fifth string of a five-string banjo is important because it lets the mind know exactly where the scale starts. Now, in the most primitive forms, the most primitive examples, we have instruments like this. This one obviously is not in the best shape, but this is a dotar. It's a very primitive, both rhythmic as well as a drone instrument. We have two strings here which rest on a bridge, and the bridge is on some tight parchment, which gives a nice rich sound. This will be tuned to the tonic, and folk musicians will use this to accompany themselves. Now, within the more classical tradition, this is an instrument that is the drone that is most associated with Indian music. This is known as the tanpura in the north, or tambura in the south. Now, it has some interesting aspects of its construction. First of all, notice that there is no fingerboard, there's no frets, there's no ability to play a melody. It's just simply a drone. But by listening to this drone, one will know exactly where one is. Now, one of the things which is interesting is not just the fact that it has no fingerboard and no frets, but it has a flat bridge, or relatively flat bridge, which is made of camel bone. Camel bone is a material in India which is very much like ivory, but it's obviously much less expensive than ivory. It's also much stronger, where ivory tends to be rather soft and will not stand up well under bridges. Camel bone stands up very well. And because it's flat, it will produce a slight buzzing sound. This is very much like the sound that one gets on a guitar with a neck that has become warped. Whereas in the guitar with a warped neck, it's an undesirable sound because it's uncontrolled. This has been very, very carefully engineered to give rich overtones. Notice too that there are small bits of thread in the bridge here. The position of the thread determines how rich in overtones the sound is going to be. So this is an example of the tambura or tanpura. This is actually a rather small one. Although sometimes they're smaller, they tend to be larger, many times up to 5 feet in length. Now we have a lot of other instruments that are important. Now, drone is important, but we also have melodic instruments that we need to deal with. This particular melodic instrument is known as the Saraswati Veena. In Sanskrit, the word veena just simply means a stringed instrument. So theoretically, any stringed instrument can be called a veena, which would include guitars and violins and everything like that. This specific veena is known as Saraswati Veena. Saraswati is the Indian goddess of learning and wisdom, and this instrument is taken by many Hindus to be sacred to Saraswati, hence the name. What we find is we find frets here. These brass frets are set into wax, and they can be moved for retuning by heating the wax, making the wax soft, and then putting the frets in new position. There is a decorative piece up here which is known as the simha, which is a lion, which is a characteristic of almost all the Venas. It also has a flat bridge, but unlike the tambura, this bridge is flat and made of brass. A rich sound. Now notice also you have strings on the side. This again comes back to our drone. Notice these strings on the side cannot be fretted. They're simply plucked rhythmically in order to help delineate the rhythm. Hence the name is called talam, which actually in Sanskrit means from clapping. But it also in many ways serves the same function as the strings of the primitive dotar, which we had shown earlier. So these strings will delineate both the rhythm as well as show the pitch, where the tonic is. So this instrument, yes, this is a bottom resonator. Now, in the old days, many instruments, Indian instruments, had multiple resonators, such as this one here, where there was an upper one and a lower one. But over the centuries, the upper resonator here has become almost vestigial, where it serves very little function in terms of the sound, but is primarily used as a prop to aid in terms of proper placement while playing. The bottom resonator is the one that does most of the effect of making the sound louder. We have a number of strings here, but although we have a number of strings, most of the melody is played really on one string. That is a strong characteristic of Indian instruments. That's one thing where we must not confuse Indian stringed instruments with instruments like guitars. Guitars, for instance, may have multiple strings, but one approaches a guitar from a standpoint of harmony. Indian instruments, although they may have a number of strings, there are subtle elements of their structure which make any playing of harmony and chords difficult, sometimes even impossible. So although they have many strings, almost all the melody is played on a single string. So conceptually, Indian stringed instruments are really more like flutes or clarinets or things of that nature. One really should not think in terms of chords or harmony whenever one is dealing with Indian stringed instruments. Well, anyhow, getting back, this is the Saraswati Veena, the instrument which is considered sacred to Saraswati, the goddess of learning and knowledge. Now, we have other Veenas as well. For instance, over here on the wall, this instrument is known as Rudra Veena. Rudra is another name for Shiva, one of the aspects of Shiva, also another one of the gods in the Hindu mythology. This originally was simply a single stick of bamboo to which two large gourds were attached. Over the centuries, they've become much more complicated. The bamboo has been replaced by a hollow wooden body. The small resonator, we also again have a flat bridge down here, where this flat bridge is normally made of camel bone. This particular one is a type of antelope horn,